Hey guys, it's Gadi Schwartz, and tonight we start with President Trump's latest plans for Gaza.
Would the Palestinians
no
have the
big
right
money
to return?
spent. No, they wouldn't, because they're going to have much better housing, much better. In other words, I'm talking about building a permanent place for them.
Trump saying Palestinians should find a permanent home in Jordan or Egypt, even though those countries refuse to accept the refugees, and now saying that if all the hostages are not released, all hell should break loose. The story is developing by the minute, and we've got the latest. Plus, the tariff wars continue. Trump just signed a 25% tariff on steel and aluminum, and that is going to hit Canada pretty hard. As for the rest of the world, any tariffs on the U.S. means tariffs for them, and that seems to be the new policy of the day. And the latest chapter in the war between two tech titans, Elon Musk and Sam Altman. There is some new reporting tonight that a Musk-led group is offering more than $97 billion to take control of OpenAI. And those are just some of the stories we are following tonight. There is so much more to unpack. So let's get going, because this is Stay Tuned Now. Okay, so tonight, just before the show, once again, Trump wading right into the middle of the Israel-Gaza war, and this time sounded like he just issued a final ultimatum to Hamas. Take a listen.
As far as I'm concerned, if all of the hostages aren't returned by Saturday at 12 o'clock, I think it's an appropriate time. I would say cancel it and all bets are off, and let hell break out.
All of that coming after a flurry of confusion that started to come to a head last week when Trump talked about the U.S. taking over Gaza and turning it into the, quote, Riviera of the Middle East, saying the Palestinians who live there would have to go somewhere else, and all while a very fragile ceasefire and hostage exchange was going on in the background. Well, today, it looks like that ceasefire agreement might be on the brink of totally falling apart. Hours before Trump's intervention, Hamas said they were indefinitely pushing back the release of hostages, which was supposed to happen on Saturday, because they said Israel wasn't honoring the ceasefire. And just before coming on air tonight, President Trump has doubled down on his stance that Gaza should be developed and Palestinians wouldn't be allowed back into Gaza and instead relocated.
If we could build a nice place for people to live safely, everybody in Gaza would do it.
What about the Palestinians who just won't leave? Our team has spoken to many.
They're all going to leave when they have a place that's a better alternative.
Now, those comments from President Trump come in right before the King of Jordan is set to meet with Trump at the White House tomorrow. NBC's Yasmin Vasugian has more from Israel. Yasmin?
In what may be the biggest test of the fragile ceasefire deal yet, tonight Hamas says they will indefinitely delay the next release of Israeli hostages. Hamas accusing Israel of violating the terms of the deal by refusing to allow aid into Gaza, delaying people from returning to the north, and continuing shelling and gunfire. While Israel has been allowing food and water to Gazans, Palestinian officials say they've fallen short in providing tents and caravans as agreed to in the deal. The Israeli defense minister tonight calling Hamas's announcement, quote, a complete violation of the ceasefire agreement, adding he's instructed the IDF to prepare at the highest level of alert. Tonight, President Trump weighing in.
Saturday at 12 o'clock, and if they're not here, all hell is going to break out.
There's been growing concern amongst both Israelis and Palestinians over whether the deal will hold, following pleas from Hamas for more humanitarian aid and President Trump's remarks about owning and developing Gaza.
Would the Palestinians have the right to return?
No, they wouldn't, because they're going to have much better housing, much better.
Over the weekend, 3 Israelis were released, appearing gaunt. Family members saying they were starved in captivity and kept mostly in the tunnels under Gaza. 6 Israeli Americans remain captive in Gaza, with 4 presumed dead. 76 hostages in all still there, and hundreds gathering tonight in Hostage Square to celebrate the birthday of a captive Israeli, instead devastated to learn about the delay.
And we are now learning Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu will be convening his security cabinet tomorrow morning in light of Hamas suspending the release of the Israeli hostages.
Yasmin Vasukian, thank you so much for that report. And joining us now is Aaron David Miller. He is a senior fellow at the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace and advisor to so many secretaries of state. Aaron, Netanyahu, he is about to meet with his security cabinet. Meanwhile, the Israeli military, they seem to be raising readiness levels all across Gaza. What kind of options do you think they're considering right now?
I mean, the president's comments constitute the clearest and greenest green light that he could have given to the government of Israel if they want to resume the war. And let's remember the organizing principle of Benjamin Netanyahu's world and his politics. On trial for bribery, fraud, and breach of trust in a Jerusalem district court 4 years in running, he has to stay in power. Otherwise, he could be convicted or he'll have to cut a plea deal that could drive him out of politics. That means maintaining his right-wing government. And one party has already gone, Gadi. The other one is threatening to leave if Netanyahu does not resume the war at the end of phase one. I still believe, though, we got 5 days to work through this. I think Hamas wanted to demonstrate a level of toughness and reaction to the president's statements about the U.S. going to take over Gaza, going to be rebuilt, and Palestinians will have better housing, but they can't come back. To Gaza, I think they're reacting against that. I think they're also worried, quite rightly, that it's going to be very difficult to get from phase one, 33 hostages released, 8 of whom are no longer alive, to phase two, which is ending the war, release of all the hostages, and Israel's withdrawal from Gaza. So a lot going on, but you still have 5 days to work this out. And I still believe that it's in Hamas's and Israel's interests to continue to go ahead to implement phase one. Beyond that, I mean, nobody ever lost money betting against Israeli-Palestinian peace. And right now, it's hard to believe that by March 1, you can move on to phase two.
But with all due respect to the President of the United States, 5 days is 5 more days of, I don't know, like this negotiation on the fly. Like, if you saw that press conference, it almost seemed like he's like, oh, noon. Yeah, Saturday noon. That sounds good. Off the top of his head. What else could come down the pipe here?
Well, in the next 5 days, you could either have this thing get back on track, or you could have additional tensions rising. And I think it's really difficult to predict. You've got two parties, both of which are committed to one another's destruction. You have a deal that was hammered out after 15 months of Palestinians, Hamas, inflicting extraordinary pain and trauma on the Israelis, and then the Israeli response, the prosecution of war against Hamas, which took the lives of hundreds of thousands, at least 50,000, including 17,000 Hamas fighters, Palestinian civilians as well. So I think in many respects, you have a president that is proposing things that frankly are more suited for a galaxy far, far away rather than the realities back here on planet Earth. I mean, for the president of the United States to basically say, well, the ceasefire should be canceled. His key negotiator, Stephen Witkoff, helped bring this over the finish line. He's claimed credit for the release of hostages. This agreement could crater on his watch. I don't think that's a good look, but then again, President Trump could easily walk away from this, blaming Hamas primarily, and of course, the Israelis, if he felt the need to do that as well.
Yeah, I want to play a clip for you of some Palestinians that were responding to some of Trump's comments earlier today. Let's take a quick listen here.
هذه مش علبة لحمة بده يبيعها ويشتريها ترامب، هذه أرضي وهذه بلادي، أنا بحيا فيها وبموت على أرضها.
والله الرئيس الأمريكي أنا بالنسبة لي وجهة نظري بهات من قلة الموت. غزة لا هي عقار ولا هي بيت عبارة عن بيت ولا شقق ولا عماير استثمار.
Now, again, that was to Trump's previous comments that Gaza should be developed and the Palestinians would have to go somewhere else, and not to the comments of, hey, until Saturday, if the hostages aren't returned, then all hell breaks loose. But if Trump's plan is to happen here and we start to see the forcible removal of Palestinians from Gaza, how do you see that playing out?
First of all, I worked for Republicans and Democrats for 27 years, Jimmy Carter to Bush 43. we've had some pretty strange ideas, but nothing, to my mind, was as untethered as an idea as what the president is proposing. His numbers are 1.7, 1.8 Palestinians in Gaza, 2.3 million. Who is going to forcibly remove them? The U.S. military? After 15 months, one of the most professional and highly trained armies in the world couldn't destroy Hamas as a political organization, or even, frankly, as a military force. The Israelis might close their eyes and wish that Trump's plan was implemented, certainly those on the right who would like to resettle Gaza. But the Israelis aren't going to forcibly transfer Palestinians from Gaza either. Egypt would close its borders, and the Jordanians, who have the longest and arguably least defensive border with Israel, would do the same. For them, Jordan in particular, the king is meeting with Trump. I'd like to be in that conversation tomorrow to see just how tough-minded the president is with Jordan. So I think that the chances of this plan being implemented are slim to none, Gadi, and frankly, Slim has left town. It's a question, I think, of trying to disrupt, maybe push the Arabs to assume more responsibility for Gaza. But in the end, none of that's going to work. And we're going to be left with an agreement that actually has a chance of being implemented, which is now being undermined by Hamas for sure, but in the from the unlikely quarter of the President of the United States. It makes no sense. It just doesn't compute.
And yet we will get a little bit more information and possibly a whole new plan tomorrow when he meets with the King of Jordan. Aaron, thank you so much. Your context is always so valuable to us.
Gadi, thanks for having me. Really appreciate it.
Sure. And meanwhile, the future of steel and aluminum, the literal backbone of so much of our infrastructure, is looking a little shaky right now. That's because just hours ago, President Trump imposed a new 25% tariff as concerns grow of a full-blown trade war, and that concern is growing bigger by the day. But Trump says part of his reason for doing this is because it's, quote, the beginning of making America rich again.
You're going to ultimately have a price reduction because they're going to make their steel here. There's not going to be any tariff. These foreign companies will move to the United States, will make their steel and aluminum in the United States. Ultimately, it'll be cheaper.
White House correspondent Aaron Gilchrist. Aaron, let's start with the aluminum and the steel tariffs. What are the immediate impacts for all of us, and who's going to feel it first?
So, Gadi, I should start by saying that we're waiting to get the exact text of the executive order and whatever orders may follow that may be combined with this particular order to find out the when and wheres of it all. But from what the president said tonight, we know that there's going to be this 25% tariff on steel and aluminum coming into this country. And that is something that we know is going to impact our relationships trade-wise with Mexico, with Canada, because those are our two biggest trading partners in those particular industries. And as you look at how this is going to impact real people every day, it's not just we're talking about sort of transportation and building big buildings. We're also talking about things like appliances and aluminum. If you like to buy your water in a can or your soda in a can, those sorts of things could be impacted. We're talking about cars and trucks potentially as well, canned foods, of course. These are all things where those tariffs, those taxes could create higher prices here for consumers in the United States, Gadi.
And Aaron, Trump also announced widespread reciprocal tariffs. Here's what he said yesterday.
Very simply, it's if they charge us, we charge them. That's all. It'll be great for everybody, including the other countries. But if they are charging us 130% and we're charging them nothing, it's not going to stay that way.
All right. So, Aaron, I mean, an eye for an eye, a tariff for a tariff. What do we know about the timeline there?
Yeah, that's essentially what we're seeing here, Gadi. The president again said tonight that we should expect to hear him make an announcement about this reciprocal tariff that he would apply globally, really. We should expect to hear more about that in the next day or two. We know that he said that he spoke with the Prime Minister of Australia about some of these tariffs as well, and there are places where there might be exceptions made. He's also said that as he's looked at tariffs, there are places where tariffs are about even, And so those countries might not expect there to be a new policy as it relates to their trading relationships with the U.S. But these are all things, Gadi, that have created some uncertainty in some markets around the world. We've seen swings globally in different directions depending on how different countries view some of these tariffs and the impact they might have. As we think about steel and aluminum, if I can go back to that for a second, the president says that he believes that while there may be some early minor impacts here in the U.S., he thinks it's going to force those things to be produced in greater numbers here in the U.S., and it's going to force other companies overseas to come into the U.S. to start making some of those things. So this seems as though it could be a way that the president is trying to drive up jobs in the United States as well as revenues, Gadi.
Meanwhile, the retaliatory tariffs from China on some of our exports went into effect today. What are they tariffing on our end?
Yeah, the Chinese announced these tariffs right after the U.S. tariffs against China went into effect last week. And part of the thinking was, I think for some folks here, was that maybe there was going to be a window of time where there might be a negotiation. We know that the tariffs on Mexico and Canada had been paused. And so there was some thinking that the president might speak with the Chinese president. There might be a pause there. That has not come to fruition, though. And as you look at some of the things that could be impacted, our understanding is that the tariffs that the Chinese are placing on the United States impact about 10% of some of the goods that are exchanged between the two countries and in very specific sectors. You can see some of those on your screen here. And so those are the things that we're looking at becoming more expensive here in the United States, Gadi. And as we talked about before, with these tariffs, while they may seem as though they're big dollar amounts on businesses and countries other than the United States, consumers here often bear the brunt of the increased costs with these increased tariffs.
NBC's Aaron Gilchrist, thank you. And now let's bring in Michelle Goodwin. She is a professor of constitutional law and global health policy at Georgetown Law School. Thank you so much for being with us today. A federal judge said that the Trump administration defied a court order that halted that federal funding freeze. They were supposed to let the money flow. They have not, at least from what we can tell. What happens if they just start ignoring court orders like this?
Well, what we see is a true threat to the rule of law. We've seen that through the myriad of the executive orders that have been signed, let's say, by Donald Trump. On each one of those that has been challenged, Trump has lost, much like in his first term where he was sued over 400 times, losing the vast majority of those lawsuits. Now you raise a very important question, which is what happens next if Donald Trump and his administration stands in defiance of court orders? Well, typically what that means is that the courts, if it's egregious, might actually get marshals involved. We've never seen that. We're confronted with a time in this administration that we just haven't seen. It's beyond, let us say, Watergate. One can anticipate that based on the judge's ruling that the Trump administration will begin to allow those funds to flow. That said, just over the weekend, you had the vice president, J.D. Vance, tweeting out something that was really quite concerning, which was that the courts cannot control what military may do or the Department of Justice, something to that effect, and should not then be able to push the hands of the president. Well, first of all, that's actually not true. If the military were involved in something that is unconstitutional, then the courts would, in fact, strike it down. If you had the Department of Justice engaged in unconstitutional conduct, there too, that could be challenged by the Supreme Court and found to be unconstitutional. So this idea that the president has no checks and balances, while that might be in the minds of J.D. Vance and Donald Trump, it's actually not accurate and not consistent with American law. And I think that bears repeating.
And again, we're a few weeks into this presidency and, constitutional crisis. If you start looking at the different court cases that are right now and already the orders that have come down, if you had to, and again, I hate to put you on this spot, but just seeing what's out there and what's on the horizon, if there was going to be a constitutional crisis or the first of a constitutional crises that we enter here, where would it be? Would it be on something like this, freezing funding? Would it be on?
It would be. It's a great question. what does that look like? And a constitutional crisis can look like something that many people would recognize, and it can also look like things that people may not discern. So in terms of what people would recognize would be a court, and it doesn't have to be the Supreme Court, right? It could be a court saying that the president is not following what is a judicial mandate or order or an injunction upon one of his executive orders, and then orders the president to comply. Now, it's true that the courts don't have a military, and usually one looks abroad and says that, well, here's a country that's in crisis where the courts are turning to the military in order to have a president comply. We've never had that in the United States. One hopes that we don't get there, but that would be the kind of constitutional crisis that most Americans would recognize. But you could see the kind of crisis that we had on January 6th. And you could see a constitutional crisis just by the myriad of the executive orders that have been put into place. And that is where it may be rendered invisible, but for constitutional lawyers, most are incredibly concerned across the country. The executive orders that have been signed over the last 3 weeks are incredibly extreme, challenging matters of constitutional principles that are just foundational. For example, birthright citizenship. We've had birthright citizenship in this country since the Reconstruction. The very idea that the president would put words on paper and sign it doesn't mean that it's actually lawful. And there are myriad other ones that we've seen. The dismantling of agencies, the refusal to fund where Congress has already allocated funding that is within congressional authority, which is the president challenging the very checks and balances that exist. Congress holds the purse strings through Article 1, Section 8 of the Constitution. Presidents in the past have not challenged that. And even when we see the effort to dismantle the Department of Education, there too, this is a result of Brown v. Board of Education, an understanding in our country that education should be for all and that education and standards for education is something that the federal government should be engaged in for the benefit of all Americans who are in this country and growing up. It's foundational. It's simple to understand, but the very idea that the president would seek to dismantle it on his own really strikes a very dangerous chord for our democracy.
If I may just ask this question, if it does come to a constitutional crisis, and again, we throw these terms around, and when I was back studying political science, like these were all the terms that meant something. But if we enter an era where it's like constitutional crisis, I guess, they're telling me to do something and I'm not going to do it. And that becomes the status quo. How do you see that playing out?
Well, it's an excellent question. And we're in uncharted territory. I wish that I could tell you something that would give a pathway forward, right? But we've never been here before. We have members of Congress who've given interviews who say that, yes, they would like to do more, but their lives have been threatened. And when we think about it, this kind of normalization of it, that actually happened on January 6th. We can't forget that. So members of Congress who say that they are fearful of their lives being threatened to do more, well, one would certainly say, well, part of this is their jobs. They've taken an oath to uphold the Constitution and also to represent their constituents and to follow what are their obligations and, frankly, what they get paid for. Certainly those who are involved in civil society organizations that have led these lawsuits and who've been able to prevail, certainly their security, they may be concerned about their security as well. But I guess my point being is that we are in uncharted territory, and that typically when there has been the defiance of a judicial order, then it is that marshals may be involved and marshals may seek to arrest those that are in violation of a judicial order. Now, let's think about how that might play out. with the president and his administration and the people that he's brought into his inner circle, such as Elon Musk. We've never been in this situation before.
And yet we are seeing, standoffs between elected members of Congress and people just standing in front of doors. It all does seem to be coming to a head. Professor Goodwin from Georgetown Law School, thank you so much for being with us tonight. Again, uncharted territories.
Thank you.
And breaking news tonight. Sure. And some breaking news tonight to get to. The Department of Justice is ordering the dismissal of those corruption charges against New York City Mayor Eric Adams. Now, to be clear, those charges have not yet been dropped, but that is the case the DOJ's acting number 2 is making. And in a memo sent to prosecutors today, he said Adams has been charged for political reasons. He also said that the charges will be reviewed again when a U.S. attorney appointed by Trump is confirmed. The bid to drop the charges comes after Adams met Trump at Mar-a-Lago last month and attended his inauguration. Adams has pleaded not guilty, and as of right now, Adams is still scheduled to go on trial in April. And here's some other headlines that we're watching tonight. A third federal judge blocked President Trump's executive order on birthright citizenship. Trump called an end to birthright citizenship for children of immigrants who are here in the United States illegally. Now, the Bush-appointed judge blocking the order said he wasn't persuaded by the administration's defense. And the trial of the man who is accused of trying to kill author Salman Rushdie begins. And this comes almost 2 years after Hadi Matar attacked Rushdie while he was speaking at an event. He stabbed him more than a dozen times, causing significant injuries and permanent damages. Rushdie is expected to testify in the trial, standing face-to-face with his attacker. And Central Nevada confirms the state's first human case of avian flu. Now, the health district says a man caught the bird flu while working with infected dairy cattle on a farm. He's recovering, and authorities say there's no evidence that it spread. And children with mild peanut allergies might be able to eat peanut butter. There's a new study that's showing that while under the supervision of an allergist, kids with milder forms of peanut sensitivity may overcome their allergy by having little bits of peanut butter, exactly like my grandma said. The researchers emphasize that this treatment must be done under the supervision of an allergist. And fly, Eagles, fly. Oh, the Philadelphia Eagles are celebrating their Super Bowl victory this Friday. Authorities are monitoring for heavy snow this week, and they have not announced a time and a place yet, but anticipation for that parade, as you can imagine, is very high. And don't go anywhere. We are just getting started. Up next, the flames might be out, but the awful effects from the California fires are far from over. Protests now growing over a toxic debris site. Plus, a flight attendant playing referee and then throwing a bunch of punches, too. We're going to show you the fight that erupted mid-flight. That's straight ahead. So stay tuned. And here in Los Angeles, tension is brewing in communities near a park that is being used to collect toxic debris from last month's destructive Eaton Fire. And locals there are claiming the federal site went up without any notice, leaving city leaders blindsided and people who live there demanding they pack it up, especially over growing concerns about the potential environmental impacts of all that toxic waste. NBC's Liz Kreutz has more.
In the Los Angeles burn zones is one of the most challenging next steps, safely removing miles of toxic debris. Both President Trump and California Governor Newsom have asked the EPA to speed up the first phase of the process.
We need it done in 30 days. The original commitment was 60 days. Spare no resources.
One of the EPA's debris processing sites, Lario Park, located 15 miles east of the Altadena burn zone, on land owned by the federal government, but long operated by LA County.
So this is the park that's now been turned into this processing center. It's usually a public park with a bike path that runs through here. All of it is now closed to the public, though. From what we can see, there's a large tent that's been set up. The EPA says this is where they are bringing the debris. They are then sorting it and packaging it up for disposal.
The use of this site in the largely Latino and working class community has sparked outrage.
Why not Altadena?
Residents packing a recent town hall.
Can you look me in the eyes and say, would you allow your children, your elderly, would you live in a place where this is going on?
The woman who asked that question, Celisa Luesa.
This was a path of least resistance. They felt like we wouldn't put up a fight. Personally, I feel like it's a part of environmental racism, too.
The EPA says the site is safe and that it will ensure no negative impact to the environment or its residents. But for Luesa, it's too late.
The bridge of trust has been broken.
And it's not just residents. The 4 mayors representing the cities surrounding Lario Park tell NBC News they were blindsided.
Were any of you contacted by anybody ahead of time or informed that this was going to be the site where the debris was coming?
Absolutely not.
No.
I was watching the news, and that's how I found out.
You found out watching the local news?
Yes.
No communication.
Chief of police thought it was a sandbag distribution.
Kind of looked like a rodeo was coming to town.
They question if the new 30-day timeline played a role.
The governor, in competition with the president, is trying to expedite everything that's through this process. Feels like we're in the crosshairs, per se.
NBC News has reached out to several agencies seeking answers about who knew what and when. LA County Supervisor Hilda Solis, who represents cities around Lario Park, declined to be interviewed, but told NBC News that the decision was made by the EPA and the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. When NBC News asked when the county first learned the park may be used as a hazardous waste site, her office did not respond. But according to the EPA, the agency first approached the county about the site on January 16th, 9 days before any of the local mayors or residents say they became aware of the plan.
I believe the higher-ups knew what was happening.
Higher-ups who?
The federal, the government, the president, the governor. They failed to inform us.
We need to make sure that the assurances are there in place, that after they pick up their tents and material and leave, that we're not left in this region being affected from years to come.
Liz Kreutz, NBC News, Los Angeles.
Liz, thank you. And Robert Gonzalez joins us now. He is the mayor that you just heard from Azusa, California City, near the debris site. Mayor, thank you so much for being with us. So as it stands right now, like, how much do you know and don't know about what's happening at the site?
From what we understand, we did have a council meeting last Monday, and EPA did take time to visit our council and our residents to go over their process. There's still a lot to be known. We know that they were looking for another site. As I understand today, they just signed a lease agreement back in the actual burn scar in Altadena. So that will help. But we are still being inundated with a number of trucks bringing in a lot of these HHWs to this site.
And how were you guys notified? Did this come from residents being like, hey, look, we're seeing some weird trucks come in? Like, how did this all come to your attention?
Well, I was notified by the mayor of DeWardy asking, hey, what's going on at Lario Park? And when I called our chief of police and do we have any operations that are going there, he thought it was a sandbag distribution. And to his credit, he didn't know. And when we found out through the local news that afternoon, that's when we started to find out what was going on at that site.
At the local news, that's pretty wild. And, you know, this is the EPA. It's the EPA now under a new administration that has had some choice words for parts of the EPA. It does seem like this is this weird political turmoil between the governor of California, the president of the United States, the EPA is involved, and then there are small communities where you are getting impacted by things like this happening every single day. Are you worried that all of this political turmoil is going to affect your situation?
Oh, absolutely. We understand that these things need to be done. That's not the issue here. And our hearts go out to the folks in Altadena and Pasadena. But communication was never given thought to the local jurisdictions. The EPA, the president, they don't have my number, but the counties do. The county has plenty of contact information to myself, the other mayors, other city managers. A phone call should have been made, and to give us heads up so we can explain this to our residents, what this is and what this isn't. The EPA has done a better job the last couple of weeks kind of explaining their process, but all this could have been avoided if somebody just would have picked up a phone and given that common courtesy to us.
And does it seem like everything is going to be taken care of, or are you concerned that all of this might come to a grinding stop, things are put on pause, and this site continues in your community?
We're very concerned still. You know, the EPA is the agency that you want to have this cleaned up, but nothing's ever 100%. My concern is what's the long-term effects of being this host city for this region. It's so close to a watershed. It's it's a concern. And when, like I said, when they leave, what are going to be the after effects, the long-term effects of this area and this region for years to come?
Mayor Robert Gonzalez of Azusa. Mayor, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you very much for having me. Thank you. You have a good evening. Thank you.
Sure, you too. Now, over to the AI front, there is a big, loud no thank you that we are now hearing from OpenAI's Sam Altman to his old pal Elon Musk, who is apparently trying to round up a posse of investors to try to buy OpenAI. Now, according to the Wall Street Journal, that unsolicited offer to buy the nonprofit that controls OpenAI was submitted today for just under $100 billion, $97.4 billion to be exact. And remember, at 97.4, because it's going to come up really fast. Now, Musk's lawyer is telling the Journal it is time for OpenAI to return to the open source, safely focused force for good it once was. But now negotiations seem to be playing out on X, Elon's other company, with Altman's no thank you and then a counteroffer to buy Twitter for $9.74 billion. Now, Musk's X's, I guess he tweeted, it's not tweet anymore, it's X'd. So he X'd the word there that you're seeing on this screen, swindler, and it's the latest chapter in this nearly decade-old saga dating back to the founding of OpenAI in 2015 when Musk and Altman helped create that company together. Now, fast forward, Altman is now working to change OpenAI from nonprofit to for-profit. So how much is it actually worth? That is the big question, the billions and billions and billions of dollars of a question, and CNBC has been trying to figure it out.
I'm being told by a source that OpenAI is now in talks for a mega funding round led by SoftBank that may value the company at around $340 billion. Just an eye-popping number, roughly double where it's currently valued in private markets. A source telling me SoftBank is going to be leading this.
And joining us now is one of the reporters who helped break this story today for the Journal, Berber Jen, who covers startups and venture capital. Berber, thank you so much for being with us. Let's start with these numbers because, like, $250 billion versus $97 billion, there is a huge, huge gap there. I literally was Googling, I don't know if you did this, I Googled 974 to see if there was any like gamer code significance, but that turned up nothing. So where is this Musk-led group getting this 974 number?
That's a good question. I think it's unclear how they came to determine the $97.4 billion number that's making headlines today. The specific bid that they're making is for the assets of the nonprofit, the OpenAI nonprofit that controls the for-profit subsidiary that is the immensely lucrative business that everyone in Silicon Valley is trying to invest in. And the argument they're making is that the nonprofit has to be fairly compensated if it's going to let go of control of the for-profit, which is what OpenAI is trying to do now. They're trying to get rid of this complicated structure and turn it into a normal business. So it's kind of a curveball that he's throwing into the negotiations. He says he's willing to follow through with it. Obviously, that's a lot of money. So a lot of question marks that OpenAI is going to have to deal with as they go through this very high-stakes transition.
And Altman is saying no thank you very publicly, but is he like the point guy on this? I know the board has had their share of drama recently, and I can't keep track of who's on first there. What's the latest with the board?
Yeah, so this offer, the board has a duty to consider this offer and act in the best interest of the nonprofit. So Altman is on that board, but obviously it's a much broader group of individuals. My sense is that they kind of know that Elon's playing games with them. He wants to provoke them and throw this curveball to catch them off guard. So I think they sort of know the game that Musk is playing, but at the same time, if he goes to them and says he's good for the money, they have an obligation to consider it. So it kind of puts them in this weird bind where they have this unsolicited bid that they have to entertain and potentially might have to match, their own offer or what they're willing to pay the for-profit subsidiary themselves to make it as competitive as what Elon is offering.
If I was watching Silicon Valley or like, I don't know, Succession, I'd be like, ooh, cool. But then you just look at this and you're like, wow, how many billions of dollars are they talking about? The question I have is, this $300 billion or like $260 billion versus the $97 billion, is that where the mark is going to be? Or like, because I've heard the 40 billion number also floated around, that it might be worth 40 billion and this 97 billion is like the high number. I have no idea what is a lot of money and what is not a lot of money for this offer. So what do you think?
Yeah, so it's a bit tricky because the $300 billion valuation is for the for-profit subsidiary that OpenAI is trying to turn into a normal business. The bid that Musk made was specifically for the nonprofit that controls that for-profit subsidiary. So the math gets kind of funky, but essentially he is making a play for a very specific part of OpenAI, which is the assets of the nonprofit. So remember, the nonprofit controls the for-profit right now. That's what gave them the power to fire Altman a few years ago. They control the technology and the IP. And so he's making a very specific play for that part of OpenAI as they try and sort of simplify their structure and become a more traditional business.
Got it. If I had $1 billion, I would give it to you for breaking that down for us, because it is insane to try to follow. Berber Jin, amazing reporting today, and thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks. It's my pleasure.
And coming up, another scary incident involving passenger planes, this time in Arizona, where rescue crews are still trying to pull a person from that wreckage. But first, I want to show you this. Just before the Super Bowl, 2 fishermen got stuck on the ice in Michigan, but the Coast Guard came to the rescue in a helicopter using a basket and a cable to hoist them to safety. They are reminding everyone that no ice is safe ice and to always check the thickness before heading out. Close call, but a pretty slick save there. We'll be right back. Hey, welcome back. We are tracking some winter weather on the way for millions from the Midwest to the Mid-Atlantic, and that is just round one. So let's get over to Bill Cairns, who is tracking all of it. Bill, we're talking snow, we're talking rain. What's the timing looking like here?
Yeah, fast-moving storms. We have 2 of them hitting completely different areas, and both of them have their little problems with them. One could even bring us some severe weather. So the first storm is beginning to take place in the northern portion here of Arkansas and the Ozarks. We do have a little bit of freezing rain. Tomorrow morning, the storm really blossoms, and we're going to see snow all through areas of Kentucky, mixture in central Kentucky, maybe even some flooding in Tennessee. And then during the day, it all moves through Washington, D.C. Baltimore will be in the mix of this, too. Even as far south as Richmond will have to deal with wintry weather. So here's the timing of it. This is 8 a.m. Blue shows you where the snow is. Heavy rain, Nashville to Memphis. And we could have some flash flooding issues. These areas have been soaked lately. And then the snow all day long tomorrow. Washington, D.C. Richmond, you start a snow, you go over to a wintry mess, and then over to rain. So you're going to see it all. And then possibility of even some significant freezing rain. Our friends in the mountains of the Appalachians, especially from Boone all the way up through Roanoke, Virginia. So how much snow? Washington, D.C., 4 to 6 inches. Pretty decent snowstorm for you. Same for Baltimore. Philly, it looks like maybe around 2 inches. New York City, only 1 or 2 inches. So not a big deal there. And our areas to the west, 4 to 6 inches in the Appalachians isn't really headlines. The second storm, this one already, winter storm warnings for Kansas City. Now, this is Wednesday. So it starts Tuesday night into Wednesday. And then this will go all the way up here through the Quad Cities, back into southern Wisconsin. And Chicago gets into the mix, too. Chicago could have easily the biggest snowstorm so far of the winter season, expecting 6 to 8 inches. So, Gadi, a lot of, travel issues. Just think of everyone, all the school closures and delays. It's going to be a lot of headaches for a lot of people.
And Bill, looking ahead to later in the week for us here in Los Angeles, so far we've been pretty lucky with these last couple of storms. A lot of rain, but the hillsides seem to be holding pretty well. Does that look like it's going to hold any longer?
Yeah, those last couple atmospheric rivers brought rain, but not like what we're expecting with this next one. So this is going to be a slow-moving storm. It's going to linger for a while, and that's going to be an additional rainfall total. So we're clear as could be right now, and you can see the storm trying to get its act together well off the coast. We even get a pretty quiet day tomorrow in the west. Really no problems. It's as we get into Wednesday that it moves in. Wednesday night into Thursday is when we get the peak of it, and it lingers all the way into Friday. As far as flood alerts go, we are under flood watches from Los Angeles Angeles to San Diego, about 10 million people included. How much rain are we hinting at? Well, from San Francisco all the way through Sacramento, this is about 1 to 5 inches of rain. So this is significant, especially the coastal areas, and high winds. So Wednesday night to Thursday morning, that's when Central California gets the worst of it. And then from L.A., Santa Barbara, the burn scar areas, the heaviest rain will be during the day on Thursday. And you noticed, this is where we had Santa Barbara area here all the way down to Malibu. That's about up to 3 to 5 inches of rain. So enough rain, Gadi, where it could be significant problems in those burn scar areas. This will be the biggest test ever since the fires.
Yeah, 3 to 5 inches. That's scary stuff. Bill Cairns, thank you. And to Utah now, where a flurry of avalanches is raising concerns amid dangerous conditions on the mountain there. Just this weekend, one avalanche taking the life of a man from Salt Lake City right during the area's peak skiing season.
Tragedy in the Utah backcountry, seeing several avalanches over the last 48 hours. One person was killed and another severely hurt on Saturday after a massive avalanche at the Alta ski area outside of Salt Lake City. Police say 59-year-old Eugenio Juan Gonzalez died after he was swept away under a 150-foot wide avalanche and buried by the snow.
There were 2 individuals that were swept up into the avalanche. One of the individuals died as a result of the avalanche. The other one was able to get out with non-life-threatening injuries. He did have substantial injuries to his leg, though.
Salt Lake County's mayor offering her condolences, saying in part, "Our stunning mountains and canyons provide us with a powerful connection to nature, but sometimes that connection brings unimaginable heartache." And just an hour later, 3 people caught in a separate avalanche nearby. One person was buried, but miraculously saved by the 2 other skiers who managed to dig them out.
It's been a very unusual, very dangerous year for us in Utah.
The state recording 20 avalanches on Saturday alone, and this weekend's fatality marks the 4th in Utah so far this season.
People are trying to thread the needle, and it's really no time for that right now. So avalanche conditions remain dangerous.
The area saw heavy snowfall over the weekend, leading to the Utah Avalanche Center to issue a considerable danger warning with a high likelihood of human-triggered avalanches. It all comes on the heels of a few recent close calls in other places, with the highway in Idaho shut down today after an avalanche slid down a mountainside there, completely covering the road in snow 40 feet deep. And in the Alps, heart-stopping videos showing a skier being swept away in a mass of snow tumbling down a mountain. The skier survived.
Okay, good to see you alive first.
Deploying an emergency airbag. You can see rescue crews flying in to airlift him out. A reminder of the danger that can build in these upcoming storms.
And here are some of the other stories happening out west that we're following right now. Speaking of airport incidents, at least one person has died after 2 jets collided on a runway at an airport in Scottsdale, Arizona. Officials say 3 people were taken to area hospitals. And up until an hour ago, a rescue team was still trying to get a 5th victim out of one of those planes that crashed. Authorities say the runway has been shut down and the scene is still active, as you see it right there. And we've learned that a U.S. Marine from California was one of 4 people killed in last week's plane crash in the Philippines. Now, that plane went down during what officials call a routine training mission. Officials say the cause of the crash is still under investigation. And Golden, Colorado held its annual Goldens in Golden event over the weekend. That is when thousands of people and their golden retrievers flock into town, creating a seemingly endless parade of those good old boys and girls, and even opportunities for those looking to fetch a date.
George is taking applications for a dog dad. Yeah, so I am newly single, and we're gonna put that on the news. So if you're looking to be a father, he needs a positive male role model in his life soon. So yeah, hit me up.
Oh my gosh, and she's got puns. I mean, obviously the news is way better than Tinder. Good luck out there. Meanwhile, we're turning to international stories now, talking about U.S. and Russia. U.S. and Russian relations are possibly on shaky ground. Well, apparently Russia is saying that they may be on the brink of collapse. We've got those details and other stories trending around the world, so stay tuned. Hey, welcome back. Let's take a quick look around the world. A warning from the Kremlin tonight. U.S. and Russia relations, which were already on shaky ground, are on the brink of completely collapsing. Now, that's the Russian government saying that they are refusing to say whether their president talked to the phone with our president, despite Trump saying so yesterday. Trump says it was the first time the 2 men had spoken since 2022. And the Baltic states of Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania have finally done something they've been talking about for decades, disconnecting from Russia's power grid. Now, that became official over the weekend when the countries hooked up their grid to the EU's power grid. Now, the Baltic states really pushed hard to unplug from Russia after the country's full-scale invasion of Ukraine. And since they are now NATO members, the move affords them more security. And 5 Thai hostages returned to Bangkok after being held for 15 months in Gaza. Their families met them at the airport yesterday after Israelis. Thai nationals were the biggest victims of the October 7th attack. More than 40 farm workers were killed and almost as many were captured. Most of them have been released. And a bus in Guatemala City falls off a bridge and into a ravine. Officials say 53 people were killed. Local reports say the bus driver may have lost control and crashed into 2 other cars. Before we go, it is time for the future of everything. Some big changes have been going on 340 miles above us here on Earth, and it might end up spelling the death of those so-called dead zones that we get on our cell phone. That's coming up next. And ever since I got my first phone, the good old StarTAC, I remember being blown away at how cell phones work. 3G, 4G, 5G, all of it beaming to us from cell phone towers. It seemed to be any spot on higher ground. Well, now we have finally arrived at the point in history where the higher ground is literally floating 360 miles up in space. So what could that do to dead zones?
56 years ago, we conquered the moon. Now Verizon is conquering dead zones with satellite, and I'm helping them do it.
Okay, so Buzz Aldrin hooking up with Verizon there. T-Mobile getting into the act with Elon Musk's Starlink. And here's the thing, you don't need to be a T-Mobile customer to try it out, apparently.
We're inviting anyone on any wireless carrier to experience it for free.
Let's bring in tech reporter William Antonelli to talk more about this whole new sat phone era that we're entering, at least for like texting, right? First off, how does this work with new phones, and why doesn't it work with voice? I hate to be like you give a mouse a cookie, but what's going on here?
Well, one of the things you have to realize is that the ability to send text messages via satellite to any phone on any network is still slightly, I wouldn't say untested, but it's still slightly unstable. The sort of quality that you would get on a phone call via satellite is not going to be the same as a phone call you make via a regular cell tower. So part of the reason why they're still holding that back, and T-Mobile especially has said that it's coming in the future, sort of undefined, is that they're really trying to perfect it and make sure that when you do make a call via satellite, it doesn't sound garbled, doesn't sound like a mess. And when it comes to new phones, just a matter of the fact that certain old phones don't have the technology to be able to connect to satellites and transmit that sort of data. So that's why they're really restricting it to new phones.
It is pretty wild that we're starting to see like this play out between cell phone carriers all competing with each other. But then Starlink, I mean, are they acting like the new next generation cell phone tower here? And what happens down the road when they decide to just cut out the middleman?
When I heard this news, my very first reaction was, this is an attempt by Starlink to eat Apple's lunch. Apple was one of the first ones a few years ago that had a very flashy satellite service launch. And the real big difference between what they're doing and what Starlink is doing is in the marketing. Apple, they really geared their marketing towards hikers, towards emergencies. You've mentioned a few things in the past hour, skiers getting caught in avalanches. Those are the sort of things that Apple was marketing towards. Well, now Starlink T-Mobile is really trying to market it as, we are getting rid of dead zones forever. Now, whether or not that's true, that'll have to be seen. And you certainly also have to remember that the majority of users are already living in places where service is plentiful. So this actual satellite service isn't really going to be that impactful to most users. But that was my first reaction. This is an attempt to really hone in on Apple's market share.
And finally, real fast, we just saw a Falcon launch here in California, more Starlinks going up, and yet there's the issue of cadence, right? And how many more of these Starlinks are going to get up in the sky, especially when the bigger Super Heavy comes online. What does that cadence look like in the coming future here?
In my eyes, the biggest obstacle to Elon Musk, let's say, installing more Starlink satellites up in space is actually sort of his political machinations. Two things that we've seen in the news very recently is in Ontario, Canada, they quote unquote ripped up a Starlink contract because of the current trade war happening between the United States and Canada. And the other country that's really anti-Starlink right now is Elon Musk's native country of South Africa, where Starlink is refusing to comply with a law that would give 30% of equity of the company to a consortium of Black-owned businesses as a way of repairing relations that were suffered in apartheid South Africa. Now, his relation to that law and how he made his money, I'll let you connect those dots yourself. But those, I would say, are the two biggest obstacles to Starlink really becoming a global phenomenon, is whether or not these countries and certain municipalities really want to work with him.
There's politics, then there's rocketry, and all of it's all mixing into one. William, thank you so much for joining us tonight. That's going to do it for us tonight. I'm Gadi Schwartz. We'll see you here tomorrow, but until then, stay tuned now.
Thanks for watching. Stay updated about breaking news and top stories on the NBC News app or follow us on social media.